They say revenge is best served cold, but when I finally took mine, it wasn't just cold. It was like pouring liquid ice straight into his veins. I can still see it in my mind. That exact moment when Victor Kane's smug smile faltered, when the color drained from his face, and he realized, far too late, that I owned him now. The man who once stood over me, holding the keys to my future, was now standing in my boardroom, and I held the keys to his destruction. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Elena Price, and this is the story of how my business partner stole my startup, erased me from the world I helped build, and how I returned years later not just to take back what was mine, but to crush him completely piece by piece until nothing was left. Before I tell you how it happened, I want you to do two things for me. First, hit that like button and subscribe to Revenge Fury because I promise you the twists in this story will make your jaw drop. Second, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing just how far our revenge family reaches. I was 23 years old when all of this began. At that point in my life I had no money, no connections, and no backup plan. I was living in a tiny one-room apartment above a noisy diner, the kind where the smell of fried food clung to your clothes no matter how much you washed them. My laptop was old enough to be in a museum, my desk was just an overturned crate, and my diet consisted of instant noodles and cheap black coffee. But I had something priceless, an idea. Called it Pulse. It was an app that could predict consumer buying patterns with eerie accuracy by analyzing real-time online behavior. At the time, there was nothing quite like it in the market. I'd been obsessed with the concept for years, scribbling ideas in notebooks, spending nights teaching myself coding techniques that weren't even part of my coursework. Pulse was more than just software to me, it was the one thing I believed could change my life. But believing in an idea doesn't make it real. I needed funding, resources, a team. And that's when I met him. Victor Kane, CEO of Kane Tech. He was the kind of man who made an impression the moment he walked into a room. Sharp suit, expensive watch, the kind of confidence that didn't need to be loud because it was already dangerous. People said he was a genius at spotting talent early. I didn't know then that he was also a genius at exploiting it. When I showed him my rough prototype in a small pitch meeting, he leaned forward in his leather chair, eyes narrowing with interest. This, he said slowly, could change everything. With the right team, we could take this global. I was too blinded by the opportunity to notice he'd already claimed ownership in his words. Within a week, I was working at Kane Tech. My salary was modest, barely enough to cover rent, but I didn't care. I had an actual office, a company email, access to better equipment, and most importantly, someone powerful telling me my work mattered. Those first few months were a blur of late nights and takeout meals eaten over my keyboard. I poured my entire being into Pulse, feeding it more data, refining the algorithms, making it faster, more accurate. Each time I showed Victor an improvement, he praised me, told me I was Kane Tech's secret weapon. I believed him. 6 months in, Victor called me into his office. He handed me a stack of papers, legal documents. Just a standard intellectual property agreement, he said smoothly. It protects your work under the company umbrella. Nothing unusual. I didn't have a lawyer. I didn't have the money for one. And I trusted him. So I signed. From there, things moved quickly. Victor brought in investors. Heavy hitters with more money than I'd ever imagined. I pitched Pulse at meeting after meeting, handling the technical side while Victor spoke the language of profit margins and market disruption. Deals closed, contracts were signed. Every single time it was his name in the press, his face in the interviews. Mine was never mentioned. I told myself I didn't care. I wasn't here for the spotlight. I was here to build. Then one Monday morning my keycard didn't work. First I thought it was a glitch. But when I got upstairs my office was empty. My things, the photos, the notebooks, even my coffee mug were gone. A security guard appeared, said I needed to come with him. He led me to HR, where a woman I'd never met before sat with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm afraid your position has been terminated," she said, sliding a single piece of paper across the desk. Terminated? I laughed in disbelief. On what grounds? Budget cuts, she replied. I leaned forward. Budget cuts. I built the product you're about to launch. Her expression didn't change. The intellectual property belongs to Kane Tech. You signed the agreement. We appreciate your contributions and wish you the best in your future endeavors. By the end of the week, Kane Tech announced the official launch of Pulse, rebranded under their name, with Victor Kane praised in every headline as the visionary who created it. My name had been erased from every internal document. The company website was scrubbed clean of any mention of me. My emails were deleted. To the world I had never existed. The betrayal hit harder than anything I'd ever experienced. The man I thought was my mentor had taken everything, my work, my credit, my future, and left me with nothing. I wanted to fight. God, I wanted to fight. But without money, lawyers, or industry connections, I was powerless. And Victor knew it. So I disappeared. Not physically, I was still in the city, but in every way that mattered. I worked under a fake name, taking on small freelance coding projects. And in the quiet I started again. This time I told no one what I was building. This time I made something even better than Pulse. Took 3 years. 3 years of sleepless nights, endless testing, and reinvesting every penny I earned. The result was Aegis, a platform so advanced it didn't just predict market behavior, it adapted to it in real time. When Aegis launched, it didn't just compete with Pulse. It crushed it. Within 18 months, we had clients in over 50 countries, from multinational corporations to government agencies. My net worth skyrocketed into 9 figures. And then, the headline appeared. Kane Tech stock plummets as Pulse loses major clients. I read the article twice, barely suppressing a smile. Victor had been riding on the success of my stolen work without innovating. Now his clients were leaving in droves, many of them coming to me. In that moment I knew exactly what I had to do. I wasn't just going to beat Kane Tech. I was going to own Kane Tech. And when I did, I'd make Victor Kane remember the name he tried to erase. I didn't go after Kane Tech right away. Revenge isn't about rushing in with fists swinging. It's about patience, precision, and timing. And after what Victor had done to me, I was willing to wait as long as it took to make sure my strike would be lethal. The first step was quiet observation. I started reading everything I could about Kane Tech's recent activities. Press releases, quarterly reports, even obscure industry blogs. The signs of decay were everywhere if you knew where to look. Pulse hadn't been updated in years. Their competitors were closing in. Employee turnover was high. Investors were restless. Victor, it seemed, was still the face of the company, still smiling for interviews, still talking about innovation. But there was nothing innovative left in what he was selling. He was surviving on my stolen idea, and it was crumbling beneath him. I knew the exact moment to move. One of my closest contacts in the investment world, a man named Samuel Ward, had been a small-time player when I first met him. Now he managed a mid-sized venture capital firm and owed me a favor for helping him secure a massive data analytics deal. Over lunch at a rooftop restaurant, I slid my phone across the table to him. On the screen was Kane Tech's latest stock chart, a slow, steady nosedive. "They're in trouble," I said. He studied it, then looked up at me. "You thinking of buying in?" "Eventually," I replied. "But not directly. Not yet. I want influence first." "Quiet influence." Samuel smirked, immediately understanding. "You want a seat at the table before you own the table." "Exactly." Through Samuel's firm, I began buying small amounts of Kane Tech stock. Not enough to make headlines, but enough to give me a vote in shareholder meetings. Meanwhile, I asked Samuel to discreetly connect me to other minor shareholders who were unhappy with Kane Tech's performance. Turned out there were plenty. One by one I met them, in coffee shops, private dining rooms, quiet parks. I listened to their grievances. Declining profits, lack of innovation, Victor's arrogance in ignoring advice. I didn't have to push hard. Discontent was already festering. All I had to do was position myself as someone who understood their frustrations and had the resources to fix them. In the meantime, I made sure Aegis kept winning Kane Tech's clients. Every time we closed a deal with a company that used to work with Victor, I had my marketing team issue a press release. Not directly attacking Kane Tech, of course, just highlighting how Aegis was outperforming competitors and delivering cutting-edge solutions where others had stagnated. I didn't have to name Kane Tech. Everyone in the industry knew who I meant. Within 6 months, I'd quietly built a coalition of shareholders holding just under 15% of the company. It wasn't enough to take over, yet, but it was enough to make Victor nervous if he realized who was behind it. The real challenge was the board of directors. I knew if I wanted Kane Tech, I needed at least a few board members on my side. And that meant targeting the weakest link. Her name was Linda Harper, and she'd been on the board for over a decade. She was smart, cautious, and deeply frustrated with Victor's leadership. I found out she was attending a tech conference in San Francisco, the same conference where I was scheduled to give the keynote speech on adaptive AI systems. I made sure we accidentally bumped into each other during the welcome reception. She recognized my name immediately. Elena Price. I know you, she said slowly, her eyes narrowing. Weren't you? Yes, I cut in smoothly, smiling. The one Victor Kane screwed over. But I'm not here to talk about the past. I'm here to talk about the future. We ended up sitting in a quiet lounge for over an hour. I laid out my vision for Kane Tech, how it could be revitalized, diversified, and returned to profitability. I didn't ask for her support outright, but I could see the spark in her eyes. She was tired of watching the company sink while Victor pretended everything was fine. When we parted ways, she shook my hand firmly. If you're serious about this, she said, you'll have my ear. It was the first crack in Victor's armor. By the end of the year, I had built my position to just over 20% ownership through proxies, friendly investors, and carefully concealed acquisitions. I was close to the tipping point, the moment when I could make my move. And then, fate handed me the perfect opportunity. An anonymous leak hit the press. Kane Tech had lost a multi-million-dollar government contract due to failure to meet innovation benchmarks. The story spread fast, dragging their stock price down another 12% in 2 days. I didn't leak it, but I knew exactly how to use it. It was time to stop hiding in the shadows. I called Samuel. Get me a meeting with Victor Kane. Face. No intermediaries. There was silence on the other end for a moment, then Samuel said, You're really going to do it? Oh, I'm going to do it, I said. And I want him to see me coming. It had been 5 years since I last saw Victor Kane in person. 5 years since that smug, satisfied smile as he paraded my creation in front of the world as if it were his. 5 years since the security guard escorted me out of Kane Tech with nothing but a box of my personal things. Now I was walking back into his life, not as the desperate 23-year-old he discarded, but as a woman whose net worth could buy and sell him twice over. And the best part, he didn't even know yet that I was the one tightening the noose around his company's neck. Samuel arranged the meeting under the guise of discussing potential investment opportunities. I insisted we meet at Kane Tech's headquarters, in Victor's office on his turf. I wanted him comfortable, for now. When the elevator doors opened onto the top floor, I stepped out slowly, letting my heels click against the polished marble. The place had changed since I last saw it. New furniture, new art, but the same oppressive air of self-importance. The receptionist glanced up, offered a rehearsed smile, and asked my name. Elena Price, I said. Her eyes widened just slightly before she recovered. Mr. Kane is expecting you. Please go right in. The door to his office was heavy, lined with frosted glass. I pushed it open and there he was. Victor stood behind his massive desk, arms spread in a mockingly warm gesture. He looked almost exactly the same. Silvering hair, tailored suit, the kind of tan you only get from expensive vacations. But there were faint lines around his eyes now, and a tightness in his jaw that hadn't been there before. Elena Price, he said like he was tasting the name. It's been, 5 years? 5 years, 2 months and 17 days, I replied smoothly, walking toward his desk. But who's counting? He gave a short laugh, though it didn't reach his eyes. I have to admit, I was surprised when Samuel said you wanted a meeting. Last I heard, you'd vanished from the tech scene. I didn't vanish, I said, taking the seat across from him. I evolved. There was a flicker in his expression, the first hint of curiosity. And now you're interested in Kane Tech? I'm interested in opportunities, I said. And right now, Kane Tech is vulnerable. His eyes narrowed just slightly. You've been keeping tabs on me. I keep tabs on the entire industry, I said, leaning back casually. But yes, I've noticed your stock has dropped 28% this year. Clients are leaving. Innovation has stalled. And then there was that government contract you lost. I let the sentence trail off deliberately. For a split second, I saw the muscle in his jaw tighten. But I suppose you think you can fix all that, he said with a smirk. I met his gaze evenly. No, I know I can. We talked numbers for the next half hour. At least he thought we were talking numbers. In reality, I was studying him, learning his tells. The way he leaned forward when something interested him. The way he drummed his fingers on the desk when he was impatient. The way he dodged questions about Kane Tech's R&D department. By the end of the meeting, I could see him recalculating. I wasn't the same girl he'd thrown out of this building. I was someone who could be useful to him. At least until he figured out my true intentions. As I stood to leave, he extended his hand. It's good to see you again, Elena. Let's stay in touch. I shook his hand firmly, holding his gaze. Oh, we will. Outside his office, I allowed myself the smallest of smiles. The seed was planted. He thought I was circling Kane Tech like a shark, which was true. What he didn't know was that I already owned a piece of him through my proxies. Over the next few weeks, I made sure our paths crossed accidentally, at industry events, charity galas, and shareholder gatherings. I was careful, never too pushy, always leaving him with the sense that he was the one pursuing the alliance. Meanwhile, I continued consolidating my influence with the other board members. Linda Harper, the director I'd met at the conference, became my closest ally inside the company. She fed me insider details about board tensions, internal disagreements, and upcoming votes. The picture she painted was even worse than I'd imagined. Kane Tech was rotting from the inside. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. Linda called me late one night. Victor's trying to push through an emergency funding proposal at the next board meeting. If it passes, it'll buy him another year. If it fails, well, the shareholders might start looking for new leadership. How soon? Yes. 2 weeks. I hung up the phone and stared out the window of my penthouse. The city lights glittered below like 1,000 tiny opportunities. 2 weeks. That was all the time I had to turn my quiet influence into outright control. And when that day came, I wanted to be sitting in the boardroom, watching Victor Kane realize exactly who had outplayed him. 2 weeks. That's all the time I had to prepare for the board meeting that could determine Victor Kane's fate. In those 14 days, I barely slept. My days were filled with back-to-back meetings, phone calls, and quiet strategy sessions with the shareholders in my coalition. My nights were spent going through Kane Tech's financial reports, investor agreements, and public filings until my eyes burned. Every detail mattered. Every number told a story. And I needed the board to see exactly how that story ended if they kept Victor in charge. Linda Harper proved invaluable. She slipped me drafts of Victor's emergency funding proposal, a plan that was meant to stabilize the company, but in reality would just keep him in power for another year while the company continued to decline. If it passed, he'd have breathing room. If it failed, the board would be forced to consider replacing him. My job was simple: make sure it failed. I met with each undecided board member one-on-one. We didn't meet in boardrooms or offices. That was too official, too easy for Victor to catch wind of. Instead, I invited them to private dinners, small charity events, even one-on-one coffee meetings in out-of-the-way places. I came armed with charts, graphs, and a calm, confident smile. I showed them Kane Tech's revenue over the past 5 years. Flat or declining every single year since Pulse launched. I pointed out how competitors had overtaken them in key markets. And I showed them how Aegis, without naming myself as the owner, had eaten up massive chunks of their client base. I didn't need to tell them Victor was failing. They could see it in the numbers. By the night before the meeting, I had secured enough no votes to block his proposal. But I didn't want to just block it. I wanted to crush it. I wanted him to walk into that room thinking he still had a chance, and walk out knowing he had none. The morning of the meeting, I dressed with precision. Charcoal gray suit, silk blouse, minimal jewelry. Just the diamond stud earrings I'd bought after Aegis hit its first billion-dollar valuation. My armor wasn't loud. It was sharp, clean, and impossible to ignore. When I arrived at Kane Tech headquarters, the air in the lobby felt tense. Staff whispered to each other, glancing at me as I passed. Some recognized me instantly. Others probably only knew me as that investor who's been showing up a lot lately. The boardroom was exactly as I remembered. Long polished table, leather chairs, massive windows overlooking the city skyline. Victor stood at the head of the table, shaking hands, smiling, acting like a man in control. When his eyes landed on me, there was a flicker of something, surprise, unease. It was gone in a second, replaced by that charming mask. "Elena," he said smoothly. "Good to see you. Here to watch history be made." Smiled. "Absolutely." The meeting began. Victor spoke first, presenting his proposal with rehearsed confidence. He talked about market stabilization, investor confidence, and future innovation. Not once did he take responsibility for the company's decline. When he finished, Linda cleared her throat. "Before we vote, I think it's important to hear from one of our more recent shareholders. Ms. Price, you've been very active in the past few months. Would you like to share your perspective?" Victor's head snapped toward her, then back to me. He hadn't expected this. I stood taking my time, letting the silence stretch. "Thank you, Linda." I walked to the head of the table, directly across from Victor, and placed a slim folder on the table. "I won't waste your time with vague promises. You all have the numbers. Revenues are down 22% in 3 years. Client retention has fallen by nearly 30%. And the only product generating significant income is Pulse, a product that hasn't been updated meaningfully in 5 years." A murmur ran through the room. I flipped to the next chart, a side-by-side comparison of Kane Tech's market share versus its competitors. "You're losing ground in every key sector. And your emergency funding proposal doesn't solve the problem. It just delays the inevitable." I could see Victor's jaw tightening, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. "And what exactly are you suggesting, Elena?" His voice was light, but I could hear the steel underneath. I met his gaze evenly. "I'm suggesting this board think about what's best for the company, not just what's best for you." The silence that followed was thick. I could feel the shift in the room, the way eyes darted away from Victor, the way some board members sat a little straighter. The vote was called. One by one, the board members cast their votes. No, 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 each one landed like a hammer. By the time it got halfway around the table, Victor knew he'd lost. His smile was gone. When the final vote was in, the proposal was dead. Victor sat back in his chair, his expression carefully neutral, but I could see the storm behind his eyes. He didn't say a word as the meeting moved on to other business. But I knew this wasn't over. This was the first real blow, and I was going to keep hitting until he fell. The failed proposal didn't just wound Victor, it left him bleeding in the water. In corporate politics, the perception of strength is almost more important than actual strength. The moment you look weak, the sharks circle. And right now, Victor Kane looked weaker than I'd ever seen him. The morning after the board meeting, the financial press tore him apart. Headlines read, "Kane Tech Board rejects CEO's emergency plan. Victor Kane loses support amid shareholder revolt. Is Kane Tech leadership on borrowed time?" I didn't have to leak anything. The story wrote itself. My coalition of shareholders, now emboldened, began pushing for further audits of Kane Tech's operations. Linda Harper quietly made sure I saw the internal memos, Angry emails from Victor to his executives, desperate attempts to rally loyalty, strained promises that everything is under control. It wasn't. Meanwhile, I turned up the heat from the outside. Aegis accelerated its client acquisition campaign, targeting Paychecks' most valuable accounts with offers they couldn't refuse. Lower costs, faster integration, and a dedicated team to migrate them away from Pulse. Every time a contract was signed with Aegis, I felt another stitch in Paychecks' safety net unravel. 2 weeks after the vote, I received a call from Samuel. He's losing investors. 2 big ones are dumping their shares this week. Good, I said, swirling the wine in my glass as I looked out over the city from my penthouse balcony. I want them. By Friday, I controlled 27% of Paychecks. I was the single largest shareholder, a fact Victor still didn't fully grasp. I decided it was time for a more personal reminder of who he was dealing with. I invited him to lunch at the most expensive restaurant in the city, the kind of place where the waiters glide silently and every table has a view of the skyline. He arrived looking tired, not physically unkempt, but there was a dullness in his eyes, a man running on pride and caffeine. "Elena," he said, sitting across from me. "I assume you didn't ask me here just to share a bottle of wine." "No," I said, smiling faintly. "I wanted to see how you were holding up." His lips twitched. "Business is business. You win some, you lose some." "That's true," I replied, leaning forward just slightly. "But when you lose, it's usually because someone outplayed you." For a fraction of a second I saw it, the flicker of realization that maybe, just maybe, I was that someone. "I have to hand it to you," he said slowly. "You've been active lately." "Just protecting my investments," I said lightly. "You understand." We both knew I wasn't talking about protecting them. I was dismantling him piece by piece. That week I made my boldest move yet. I filed a motion with the board to hold a vote of no confidence in Victor's leadership. It was aggressive, yes, but the timing was perfect. His public image was in tatters, the stock price had dropped another 9%, and internal morale was collapsing. Linda called me the night before the vote. "You've got the numbers," she said quietly. "He doesn't stand a chance." The next morning the boardroom felt different. And heavy. The air was thick with anticipation. Victor entered last, his smile gone, his steps slower than usual. He took his seat at the head of the table, but the authority in that position was already slipping through his fingers. The vote was swift. 10 in favor of removing him, 3 against. It was done. Victor sat there for a moment, not moving, not speaking. Then slowly he stood. His eyes locked on mine. For a brief second, I saw the man who had once charmed me into trusting him, but now that charm was cracked, hollow. "You think you've won," he said quietly, so only I could hear. "But this isn't over." I leaned in just enough for him to catch my words. "It will be." As he walked out of the room, the sound of the door closing behind him felt final, like the end of an era. But for me it wasn't the end. It was the moment before the final strike. I didn't just want him gone from Paychecks. I wanted the company in my hands, fully, legally, irrevocably. And now, with him out of the CEO chair, the path was wide open. Removing Victor from the CEO chair had been the first real, undeniable blow. But it wasn't enough. Not for me. I hadn't spent years clawing my way back from nothing just to see him step down and retreat quietly into the shadows, still holding a fortune he didn't deserve. No, I wanted the company that was once mine. I wanted Paychecks, the very empire he had stolen from me, under my control. I wanted to put my name where he had tried to erase it. And most importantly, I wanted him to watch it happen. The weeks after his removal were a calculated storm. Paychecks was in a delicate state, leadership uncertain, investors unsettled, the media watching like hawks. Alan Drake, the interim CEO, was a man built for keeping the ship from sinking but not for steering it toward greatness. He was careful, polite, and completely unthreatening to my plans. I made sure to appear supportive in public, praising the board's decision, expressing confidence in Paychecks' future. But behind closed doors I was on the phone every single day, buying, negotiating, persuading. Every investor meeting was a hunt. I targeted the small shareholders first, the ones who owned just enough stock to feel important but not enough to hold influence. They were easy prey. The uncertainty after Victor's departure had them rattled. I offered them slightly above the current market price for their shares, enough to make it seem like they were walking away with a smart profit. It worked. One by one they sold to me. For the bigger shareholders I played a different game. I didn't just offer money. I offered vision. I showed them charts comparing Paychecks' decline under Victor to the meteoric rise of Aegis. I didn't tell them I owned Aegis. Not yet. I wanted them focused on the numbers, not the personal vendetta. By the end of the first month, I controlled 39% of Paychecks. It was a number no one could ignore. I had more influence than any other single person connected to the company. The board knew it. The remaining shareholders knew it. And somewhere in whatever expensive hideout he'd crawled into, Victor knew it too. He had been quiet since the no-confidence vote. Too quiet. The media reported that he was exploring new ventures and considering his options. I knew what that meant. He was trying to salvage his reputation. But without Paychecks, without pulse, without the illusion of innovation, he was just another man with a bruised ego and dwindling allies. Still, I wanted to be sure, so I made the final step public. When the acquisition papers were ready, I had the signing ceremony staged in Paychecks' largest conference room, the same one where I had been humiliated and erased from the company years ago. Only this time the cameras were there for me. Reporters lined the walls, their voices low but buzzing with anticipation. The long polished table gleamed under the lights, the Paychecks logo projected in massive scale behind us. I arrived in a tailored black suit, my hair swept back, every detail calculated to project authority. No flashiness. I didn't need it. My power was in my presence. The moment I stepped into the room, every camera turned toward me. The flashes went off in quick bursts, and for a split second, I let myself enjoy it. The reversal of fortune, the poetic symmetry. The documents were placed in front of me, thick with legal jargon, each page a step toward sealing the fate of a man who once thought he'd erased me. I picked up the pen, the weight of it solid in my hand. The moment my signature hit the final page, it was done. I wasn't just a shareholder anymore. I was the majority owner of Paychecks. The room erupted in noise, the click of cameras, the rush of reporters shouting questions. Ms. Price, what's your first priority as majority owner? How do you plan to turn the company around? Do you have a message for Victor Kane? I chose my words carefully. Paychecks has always had the potential to lead the industry. My goal is to make it innovative, ethical, and unstoppable. This is a new era for the company, one where credit goes to those who build, not those who steal. I could feel the ripple in the room as the last words landed. They all knew who I was talking about. Later that afternoon I stood in the executive office. My office now. The view from the top floor was breathtaking, the skyline stretching endlessly in every direction. I let my fingers run along the smooth edge of the desk, remembering the day I'd been escorted out of this building with nothing. A soft knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. Turned. Victor was standing there. For a moment we just stared at each other. Gone was the man in the perfect suit with the flawless smile. He looked older, smaller, not physically but in presence. His posture was slouched, his expression tight, like a man forcing himself to stand in a place that no longer belonged to him. I suppose congratulations are in order, he said finally, his voice low. I stepped toward him, my heels clicking on the polished floor. You once told me we could take Pulse global, I said. You were right. But you forgot something. You can't build an empire on stolen foundations. It always collapses. His jaw tightened. You think you've won. I tilted my head slightly. I know I have. For a long second we held each other's gaze. Then he turned and walked out. No parting words, no grand exit, just a quiet retreat down the hall until he disappeared. I stood there for a moment longer, letting the silence fill the room. This wasn't just about the money or the company or even revenge. It was about proving something to him, to the world, and to myself. That I could be knocked down, humiliated, stripped of everything, and still rise higher than anyone imagined. And I had. Now Paychecks was mine. The empire he had stolen from me was back in my hands, rebuilt on my terms. I turned toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city spread out before me like an open map of possibilities. I thought of the girl I'd been 5 years ago. Broke, underestimated, betrayed, and I smiled. To everyone watching this right now, remember this. They can take your ideas, your work, even try to erase your name. But they can't take your will to fight back. If you're patient, if you're strategic, if you refuse to give up, you can take back everything. So, if you enjoyed this story, hit that like button, subscribe to Revenge Fury, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every single one, and I want to know just how far our revenge family reaches. Because this story might be over, but our fight, it's only just beginning.